Get ready to be inspired by the great things happening in rural education. The Rural Scoop will bring you new ideas and innovative solutions. We'll dive into education issues and we'll highlight what's working in your rural communities. You'll hear from a variety of educators, administrators, professionals, and others who will provide relevant and engaging content in each episode. And now, serving up the scoop, here's your host, Dr. Melissa Sadorf.
Rural educators are navigating one of the biggest shifts that we've seen in a generation, and too often they're doing it without a clear roadmap. Before we jump in, though, I want you to hit subscribe if you're not already subscribed to the Rural Scoop, because your subscription helps other rural educators find the show, and it helps keep us elevating rural leaders who are building solutions in real time. Today, I'm joined by Christian Pinedo, Vice President of External Affairs and Advocacy at AIEDU. Christian leads the partnerships, communications, and advocacy work that helps schools and policymakers build real AI readiness. Not hype, not fear, but really practical literacy and decision-making that protects students and supports teachers. I met Christian through AIEDU's work with the National Rural Education Association via a grant partnership, and I'm excited to dig into what that collaboration taught us about rural needs, what districts should do first, and what policy guardrails matter absolutely the most right now. So, Christian, welcome. Thanks for taking some time to talk to me.
Thanks so much, Melissa. I'm very excited to have a conversation with you. I feel like we've touched base a couple of times in the past year or two, but I just every time I talk to you, it's a joy.
Oh, well, thank you. Likewise. Well, I'm excited for this conversation. I want to start, though, really with what brought you into the work that you're doing, which is helping schools navigate AI and the systems that are built around that to ensure safety.
Yeah, it was honestly kind of an accident. AI has never been something I've pursued in my career at all, but it just kind of fell into place the way that it did. So I started in the classroom. I was teaching in Southern California for about 8 years. I was a high school teacher. I initially started as a chemistry teacher and then taught visual arts and web design courses for a little while. And then as I started to do more like graphic design and web design courses, it was around the same time that California started really investing a lot into our CTE pathway programs. And so I started designing those pathway courses themselves. So I started doing a lot of work in the CTE space. And so my work kind of got out of the classroom a little bit. Started working more with County Office of Education here in California, doing a lot of thinking about how to best prepare students for jobs that don't force them into four-year universities, and really thinking about different pathways that students can go on once they leave high school. And that's kind of where my career really has been anchored in a lot. It's been less around AI and more around how to make that student experience more relevant for what their future holds. I got into the AI space via research. And so I ended up getting a gig at the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI. And this is 2019, 2020. So this is before the GPT generative AI kind of excitement that was in the space. And so when I got into this research space, it was kind of it was a very small team at Stanford that was looking at this right at the moment. What was really cool about the research institute is I was very multidisciplined, meaning we were housed not in a specific office, but we were housed in the Dean of Research. And we had researchers from humanities, from technology, from language, from law that were a part of this institute. So it was a really cool kind of cross-sectional look at the way AI was impacting a bunch of different areas. And I was building out a lot of our educational programs. And for Stanford, educational programs is varied. I was doing a lot of high school programs, meaning we brought a lot of high school students to the university and did some AI engagements with them there. But we also built out educational programs for policymakers, for C-suite executives, and helping them think about AI in their fields. And then the kind of everyone's aha moment was when ChatGPT came out in November of 21, I believe. And so I joined AIEDU in January of 22. So only a few months after GPT came out, because that was my moment where I realized, oh my gosh, this is really gotten from a conversation that was really only universities and, conference rooms and a couple of folks thinking about AI as a technology in very niche ways. So people thinking about AI in a very broad way. Everybody all of a sudden had this chatbot in front of them that was writing haikus. It was telling jokes. It was like writing essays for people. And from a teacher's perspective, this is also right around the moment where we were coming out of COVID and teachers were already grappling with a ton of like change. There was like whiplash happening around so much transformation in the education space already. And then ChatGPT happens and immediately there's this like, oh my gosh, students are using this for a bunch of stuff. What do I do about it? Like the cheating conversation is probably like a lot of educators' primary entry point to the conversation around AI. And so like that was kind of my moment. It was like, okay, let me get out of the research space and go a little bit more into like the practitioner space. Joined this nonprofit. AIEDU had been around since 2019 as well. So I was aware of their work already, and I was already personally a little bit of a fan of the work that AIEDU was doing. So it was really cool to join this organization and get a little bit more direct work and face time with educators across the country.
Yeah, I can remember my first exposure was, if your child finds out that Santa isn't real, how do you address it with them? And it was a letter that you could have the LLM write for you as a parent to your kid. So, I mean, we've come a long way.
There's so many like little niche use cases that I remember. I think the moment that I remember that made this feel like viscerally powerful, I guess, was like, because like, again, I'd been in the spaces where like AI was talked about in like very niche ways and like more like research or like cutting edge technology ways. And then I saw a segment about ChatGPT on Good Morning America. And that was my like, oh wow, this is like a dinner table conversation now. This isn't just a boardroom conference, like tech conference thing now. This is like, it's being talked about on morning news. My mom is asking you about this. Like that was my like, wow, this is going to be something that I feel like a lot of people just get surprised by.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you wish that educators really understood about AI before they ever touched a platform?
I don't know. There's a lot of things. I think from like the tech side, I think it's really important to always remember that AI is built upon decades and decades of technologies that inherently are all based on math, data science, and computer science. Mm-hmm. No matter how sophisticated it feels, it's still a statistical model in its baseline. So this is never going to be perfect. Like as LLMs exist right now, we can never buff out all of the rough edges. There's always, because it's a statistical model, there's always going to be these outliers. And so the technology itself statistically cannot be perfect. And so that forces you to really think about what is like the humanity I need to bring into this to make sure that I understand enough about it in order to make it feel useful and effective and safe for the thing that I'm trying to use it for.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, for listeners who might not know AIEDU, what do you actually do, and how do you define AI readiness in a way that, say, a rural superintendent or a rural teacher could understand it?
Yeah, like I said, AIEDU has been around since 2019. So we were kind of thinking about AI before large language models and generative AI really took off. And even then, the idea and the ethos around AIEDU was around, like you mentioned, readiness. The idea that AI was already becoming such a pervasive force. Like in 2019, 2018, it was kind of an invisible force. It was still affecting the things that you saw online. It was affecting, if I was applying for a car loan, there was an AI system helping make that decision for me, but that was like in the background. If I was, our credit scores are being calculated by AI. Like there's so many things that were already being affected by AI, but it's a very invisible force in society. I think generative AI has become a very visible and front and center kind of thing. But even the work initially around AIEDU was trying to help teachers and young people understand that this is something that is affecting your day-to-day life. There are things like bias that are becoming built into that force. And so helping build the literacy around those things was initially what AIEDU is doing. I think right now, AI readiness is something that is a very potent thing that we're working on. Our ethos is really around, there's no world in which AI from here forward, that AI is not something that we have to talk about. It's not something we can't really ignore right now. And whether you are for AI or against AI, we think that every educator, every student should be ready for that conversation. We want you to be able to make decisions for your students, for yourself, for your families, from a stance of understanding. We want you to understand what the technology is, what its risks are, what its potential benefits are, and help you make a decision best for yourself and for your students.
Yeah.
Education for us is like the biggest lever that we have as a country for societal change and to help support people's readiness as they grow into the world. And so supporting teachers, supporting classrooms to have these kind of difficult conversations sometimes is and always has been AIEDU's ethos. Like, what does it look like for a teacher to facilitate a conversation with students around the use of AI and deepfakes in political campaigns? What does it look like for a government teacher to have that conversation in their classroom and really get students to think critically about this, to understand the nuances of the conversation, and to really be able to build their kind of like discussion, their discourse? Like, how do you get students to actually talk about it in a way where you have to force your humanity into the conversation about something that feels so tech driven? I think that kind of readiness is something that we're trying to do more and more of.
It's interesting. I am also a professor for Northern Arizona University, and we've had conversations with some of my doctoral students around how do you use AI ethically when you're writing a dissertation? And it's still a conversation that is tricky. And there is no one way to skin the cat, so to speak.
Yeah.
So yeah, even at the university level, those conversations come up.
Yeah.
Christian, what are the core skills that you think that every student that's graduating from high school really needs to have, even if it's not coding, which we know is something that some students may have access to and others don't?
Yeah, and it's hard to say. I think there's 2 points I want to make on this. The idea of core skills that are going to be useful for the future is really our best take based on the data that we have available. Like I try to take like a researcher lens to this, and I always want to caveat by saying the future is like increasingly changing at a rapid pace right now. And so data informed competencies or frameworks that exist right now, I think there are a lot of good ones out there, but they're all really us taking kind of our best guess. AIEDU worked with the Burning Glass Institute to actually put out a piece of research that gets at this specifically. And we did this from the mindset of trying to connect market labor research and K-12 education research. The idea, we essentially took hundreds of thousands of job postings from the past year and a half or 2 years and tried to look at how skills demand in job postings have been changing. And then we mapped those skills against the graduation requirements across, I think, 43 states. And so we were looking at comparing the kind of skills that we saw present in the workforce and the skills that we saw that was like education was outputting into society, essentially. Sure. We wanted to kind of see if there's if they're analogous, if there's a lot of overlap, if there's a lot of incongruency. What we found is actually a lot more nuanced and probably annoyingly nuanced. One, that the skills, the kind of competencies that are important going forward are not like, need to get rid of computer science. It really isn't like that all like subjects themselves are shifting. It's those competencies within the subjects that are shifting a lot. Meaning, yes, coding is something that's becoming very impacted by the technology itself. But what isn't being impacted and what's still super necessary if you're using AI to code is the kind of structural understanding that I gained by going through a computer science class. I still need to learn about security and how data works and how basic computational infrastructure works. The thinking process I go through as a coding designer is still super important. And so like those are skills that are still super relevant. The
Yeah.
actual active coding may be a little bit transformed right now because of AI, but computational thinking, the creativity I can kind of deploy as a computer scientist, understanding the infrastructure behind all these things, that's still super important. And so a lot of the competencies that we teach in the K-12 system, I think are going to kind of transform in a way in which we're forced to really think about what are the basic understandings that I can develop. Kids still need to read, do math.
Yep.
We still need to be creative. We need to know how to communicate. Like those are still very necessary skills. It's the way that we express those skills it's what's going to change. Just because I understand how to code doesn't mean that me writing 50 lines of code can demonstrate my competency in computer science. But I should understand like what this code, like what does it do? How does it interact with other things? How can I work with a team to build something using computer science? And so it's really the way that we express these competencies that's changing. And so I find that educators and classrooms and schools that have been investing for the past couple of decades in things like project-based learning are really seeing that coming to life. We're seeing that project-based learning is a really interesting mechanism by which we can really think about the variety of ways we express learning. You can express learning by being creative with a partner and problem solving in a way that where we have to think about looking at a problem from unique angles. But it can come at like producing a written piece, but can you not just produce it, but can you talk about it? Can you engage in discourse? Can you talk to me about your thought process of how you actually wrote this piece that you wrote? A lot of those things that are kind of squishy and harder sometimes to define clearly, like we're finding those to be extremely valuable right now. The problem, I think that the anxiety that I feel in the space is like those kinds of skills are some of the hardest to measure. How do I measure creativity? How do I measure critical thinking? Or how do I measure my ability to problem solve with another human? Like that's actually really difficult to measure. And education really, the way the system is built right now requires us to measure progress against these competencies. And I think that's what's getting difficult right now. And so we're kind of at this crossroads where I think a lot of educators who dig into this conversation can kind of agree that a lot of those interpersonal, those human-based skills are super important, but those are also the skills that are hardest to measure. It's really easy to measure if I can write a 5-paragraph essay that includes a thesis statement and 3 supporting arguments and examples that pull quotes to support my thesis. Like it's easy to measure those things because if I'm a teacher and I have a rubric, I just check the box every time I see the things that I want to look for in an essay. But it's harder to measure when I ask my student, why did you choose this argument? And why did you choose this example? Can you talk about your process that you went through in writing this? Like, how do I measure that as an educator? That's so difficult.
Yeah.
Anyway, like those are the very squishy things that I feel like have been way more valuable in the past couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I met you through our NREA grant work, and you were doing some learning around rural districts through that partnership. Can you talk a little bit about what it was that you learned through those 2 projects that we did with you?
Yeah, I'll talk about. There's like a learning that I had that like essentially got AIEDU to create that program. So I'll talk about that initial learning, and then I'll talk about like the kind of learning that we got into as the program continued. So the initial, like the kind of starting point for our Rural and Indigenous Catalyst program was initially we knew we wanted to make sure that we were thinking about rural and Indigenous school systems and communities as innovative and as part of the conversation. Initially, AIEDU wanted to do this work directly. And I remember, this is like 3 or 4 years ago now, but there was a point at which I had traveled to New Mexico. I was in Albuquerque. And for those who are unaware, Albuquerque is like one of the major cities, but it's right outside of Navajo Nation that spans New Mexico and Arizona. And we were working with an Indigenous and rural organization called Indigitize, who does a lot of like Indigenous computer science programs. And I was there in partnership with Indigitize to do a lot of like trainings for educators that were in and adjacent to the schools in Navajo Nation. And I very quickly realized that, one, I was the wrong person to be in that room. I was like fully out of place. I was not the right voice for the conversation on AI. I did not have the cultural context that I needed to have in order to actually connect with folks. I didn't have the relational context that I needed to even to understand what the region was like. And so for me, honestly, it was like a very eye-opening and humbling experience of like, oh, this is wrong. Like, I should not be flying into these places and trying to tell rural educators what they should be doing. I'm the wrong person to be doing that. And that was learning number one. Learning number two is these folks are already having a lot of really cool discussion that I never even considered. There's like already a lot of discourse and healthy discourse happening here that me being in this room is not contributing as much as I want it to be contributing. What I should be doing is be thinking about like, how can I support the work, the conversations and the work that's already happening here? And so like that kind of led to us designing a program in which we granted dollars out to community-based organizations that were already doing a lot of work around education, innovation in rural spaces, which is how like I initially got connected with NRAA, because like NRAA is like one of the like biggest networks in the country that actually has their finger on the pulse in a lot of these communities, these districts, these community-based organizations. And so that's initially how the program kind of came to be, how I got connected with the NRAA. So fast forward a year, we designed this program where we're grant making out to community-based organizations. And to be fair, like we're a 501c3, we're a nonprofit. It's very weird for us to be grant making. It's not like a common thing for a lot of nonprofit organizations to do. But for us, it was like a very creative way to support community-based and rural organizations in a way that felt genuine, and that we were not trying to just come in and give our services or give our products to you, but like, let's support you financially and put money where our mouth is and say that we want to be really thinking about rural and Indigenous innovation. We also were talking to a lot of folks, and we found that like rural schools make up a huge part of America's fabric. I think about 30%, it's like 28% of schools in the country are rural school systems. And yet philanthropic giving for rural communities is only sitting around 7 or 9% of all philanthropy that goes out. And so like there's a big gap between the audience of folks that live in rural communities and the kind of ways that they're getting support. And so we were like, okay, let's put a little bit of our money where our mouth is. Let's experiment. And so year one of this program was a little bit of a test for us. We worked with NRAA to see how this worked. Or correct me if I'm wrong, but this is like 3 years ago now. But year one, we had 2 projects that we started. One was in Maine and one was in Tennessee. And we were supporting a couple of school districts. And I'm going to talk about the learning and the kind of like amazement that I saw in the project that we supported, that NRA and AIEDU supported in Maine. And essentially what happened was, along with dollars and along with like an actual grant, we created this kind of moment for a lot of organizations to think of as like, oh, this is our opportunity to start a conversation that we've been wanting to start for like a year now. So the grant kind of kicks off. We, I think, initially scale a teacher PD system where it was a combination of community organizing and putting together events and community events and like spaces where teachers from rural communities, rural parts of Maine can kind of come together. That's value number one, was like the amount of feedback that we got about that space and opportunity to come together and talk with other educators, ask questions, figure out like who is also thinking about this and who can I talk to, bounce ideas off of. Mm-hmm. That convening power was value number one and like learning number one. Especially for rural educators, it's easy to feel more isolated and like I'm not I'm alone in these questions, in these conversations. And so like the opportunities to come together, sometimes that means I'm driving 3-4 hours in order to come to this convening where I'm going to get lunch and talk to other educators and go to this PD session. Like a lot of educators that we talked to were like, there was a long drive, but I was so happy that I did it because I don't get many opportunities to talk to other educators from my state that are also in rural communities, but it could be similar or different. So one, just building community space and having an opportunity to bring people together. That was like something that we kind of unexpectedly really saw a ton of value in. And then two is the PD itself, or like the professional learning opportunity, was less, let me tell you what you should think. It was less, let us tell you how should you be using technology. It wasn't, you have to use XYZ tool. It wasn't about, you have to do XYZ thing with AI now. It was more about, here's what AI is. Here's how you should be thinking about recognizing the red flags of the technology. Here's where there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of gray space. Let's talk about this gray space. It felt like it was a little bit more of an open door for teachers to walk through themselves and then engage in the conversation. And I think the feedback that we got from educators and from that context is also super powerful. The fact that they see AI and they're like, oh my gosh, they're going to be selling me a tool. They're going to be trying to give me some sort of product that I have to buy and like use in my classroom. And then they actually go through the workshops and they go to the convening and they're like, wow, I actually learned a lot. And I feel like I can actually apply a little bit more critical thinking to the situation than I did before. That was like another aha moment or another value that was super prevalent in a lot of the feedback that we got and a lot of the conversations that I had. And so like those are like the two big things, like community building and just giving space for critical thinking, not just selling products.
Did you find that there were rural constraints that really challenged them on how an AI initiative had to be designed? Was there anything that you learned about that, whether it was this particular project or others that you've been in touch with?
Yeah, I mean, access is probably one of the bigger conversations around those constraints, especially, I mean, we've done a lot of projects in, for example, rural parts of Alaska and Hawaii, in which across the board, rural communities have less access to even internet connection, especially in rural communities in Hawaii and in Alaska, I learned, are really struggling with just access to basic internet infrastructure. And we were working with a couple of Indigenous groups up in Alaska, and we learned that their primary source of communication for parents and for teachers was via radio. They were announcing PD opportunities via radio systems, parent announcements if there was school closure because of a snow day. Like everything had to be communicated through radio. And so in some cases, we had to think about delivering professional development through radio systems, which I think was such unique and kind of like an interesting like problem solving situation that we were put in. In this case, like again, AIEDU wasn't doing any of the direct work. We were kind of supporting the organizations that were. So there was a nonprofit organization based out of Anchorage, and they were building out these PD sessions that were designed to be facilitated asynchronously, but not through Zoom, but through radio. And so like helping them work through that process was such an interesting and cool and creative, like creative thing that we got to do. But I think it highlighted one of the biggest tensions that we saw in the space is no big nonprofit in the country, no big Google or Microsoft or tech company is building resources for teachers that is designed for that mechanism. There were no resources out there for these organizations and for these educators. They had to build it themselves. And I think that was like a very common thread that we saw. Whether it was an Indigenous population that wanted to build resources in their own language, whether it was rural communities that wanted to make sure that they were building resources that was addressing the specific cultural and agricultural context that they were living in. They wanted homegrown resources to be shared with their educators and with their students. They didn't want to pluck something from that was available online or from a tech company or just handed to them. A lot of the value was like, we want to develop it ourselves. We want to bring our own community, our own values into the kind of way that we talk about this technology. And so I would think about it as both a constraint, but also just like a really cool opportunity to see communities express their values and their culture and their humanity into the way they talk about something as it's kind of inhuman as AI.
Yeah. If a rural, and to that point, if a rural superintendent were to say to you, "Hey, we don't have an IT department, and we know that this is a trend, and we'd like to join, but we're just not sure where to start." Where would you tell them to start? Because they could start with policy or instruction or PD, messaging to the community, which we know is a thing that they've got to worry about too. Where would you tell them to start?
Yeah. I think the initial, I mean, we have it, like we do have like a framework that kind of outlines this. And for school districts or school systems, one of the first places you start is like, first, just clarify, what are my values in this conversation? What are the things that I think are important to bring forth in this conversation, whether it's student safety, whether it's community, like community voice and making sure that people are included in the conversation, whether it is, making sure that access is something that I address first and foremost. Like, what are your values? Take those values and start to translate them through a strategic plan. Like, what are the things that I want to set forth? That starting with like the value propositions is like a good thing to do. And this strategic plan should include like maybe like 4 different facets to it. Facet number 1 is policy. Like, what if I want to make sure that I'm doing this responsibly, I need to understand how safety is involved here, especially when it comes to technologies that are very new and kind of, there's a lot of products and there's a lot of things out there. Making sure that I have a clear understanding of what safety looks like in the space and if what district policies I should be setting are, that's important. And oftentimes the district policy isn't some sort of new AI policy that I have to pull out of nowhere. It's probably looking at my existing policies. What are my responsible use policies looking like? What are my student data privacy policies looking like already? And those are usually like the anchor points that you don't want to completely change, but maybe like think of through the lens of AI tools. Mm-hmm. So starting with policies, thinking about how does this work connect to the broader goal of my school district? The broader goal should be preparing students for their futures. And so maybe I already have career pathway programs already set up in my school district. And so maybe thinking about this via that program that I already have set up. Or maybe I already have student mental health programs set up, and I want to make sure that I'm embedding a lot of this conversation into those existing things. So I usually push districts this isn't some sort of new initiative or new mandate that I need to push forth. But I need to think about the things that my districts are already doing and think about how AI might be a forcing function or a force of augmentation or a reconsideration of the things that I already have going on. And then, like the third angle there is community engagement. Like how am I making sure that I'm bringing in the voice of my teachers, my students, my parents. I think there's a school district in Georgia that the superintendent, I think, communicated really well. And he says, I'm just thinking about the ballpark conversations. Like, what are the bleacher conversations that my parents are having? I don't want to roll out some sort of big AI initiative and those bleacher conversations be very skeptical and very hesitant about this conversation. So how do I engage my parents that way when they're Saturday watching their kid play t-ball and they're all sitting on the bleachers together talking about what their schools are doing, that it's not some sort of anxiety or like fear-driven wondering about how my school's thinking about AI. I want my parents to be able to say like, oh, my school's really thinking about it in XYZ ways. And here's the things that I'm worried about. Here's the things the school district seems like they're also thinking about. Like being transparent in that process is super important.
Mm-hmm. I want to shift just a little bit to guardrails, because rural districts, actually all districts, get pitched to constantly. There's always vendors that are selling AI-based products, and so they need to be aware of some of those non-negotiable questions that they should be thinking about when it comes to things like privacy, like you're talking about, or data use, or training, evidence that this is a product that actually does do what it says it does. So what would you advise, especially rural districts, to think about before they sign up with a vendor that has a product?
Yeah, this is so many school districts, especially when AI was like first, like in the past 2-3 years, a lot of school districts were kind of caught up in this game of whack-a-mole. Like it was initially a lot of districts started to block a bunch of platforms. And I think that was probably good. Just like making sure that we're looking at these from like a case by case basis, and we're not just allowing any tool to pop up. Because you know that teacher Facebook groups or teacher chat groups are just full of a bunch of teachers like, hey, I tried this tool, and they share it to the group, and a bunch of teachers are now trying it again. Like I've been caught up in that as well. And so districts are dealing with this thing where this teacher raises their hand like, I want to use this tool. And so you have to go to your IT team. The IT team looks at it. They either green light or red light the tool. And I remember so many IT directors were referring to it as a game of whack-a-mole. Like this new thing would pop up. We'd have to look at it and say, do we green light it? Do we red light it? Like they kind of have to assess everything on a case by case basis. And that was taking up so much time of IT teams at districts. I think we've kind of moved. Some districts are kind of still in that game of whack-a-mole, and some districts have moved a little bit away from that. And the big difference is between those two districts is thinking about AI tools as like a case-by-case basis. There's so many use cases for AI tools, whether it's I'm a teacher and I want to use it for lesson planning, or I'm an educator that wants to use it for my IEP plan generation, or I want to think about using tools for personalized student tutoring systems. Like there's so many different kinds of tools, and each use case has very different security and privacy mechanisms that you should consider. If I'm generating IEP plans, I may be dealing with a lot of sensitive student data, maybe even health data that the student has, that the district has. And so it's going to be a very different layer of security that I have to consider versus a teacher using AI to differentiate lesson plans that might not need to include private student data, versus a student-facing tool that might be a tutor chatbot, and now I'm having a student engage with this AI tool. And so there's so many different kinds of use cases, and districts got caught up in this in thinking of AI as this monolith, and there's no such thing as a single AI framework of decision making that I should make. It's really thinking about what are the objectives or what are the use cases that we're considering here, and how do I build procurement or decision making guidelines based off these use cases. Any use case, whether it's using AI or not, that deals with student IEP plans, here's the things that we need to make sure that we're doing. Any use case with that there's a technology being used for lesson plan generation, or if I'm using, so a lot of districts are using AI to help them optimize their bus routing, right? But that's going to require student address information sometimes if I'm planning out my bus routes. And so it's less about a one size fits all policy that fits all AI tools. It's more about thinking about what is my objective, or what is the thing that I'm trying to do with technology, and then making sure I know the policy or the safety mechanisms that I should be considering there. So that was kind of a non-answer. That was
no, that was a really good answer.
But it really does depend on the situation, and it's important for folks to think about these kind of policy conversations or regulatory conversations, not from all AI needs to be regulated in the same way, but let's think about what is the intention here, and let's build at everything in the school system. You have different policies or different mechanisms or processes set up depending on the use case or depending on the thing that I'm trying to do.
Yeah. Another thing that is in the conversations that I'm hearing at K-12 and has been an issue is AI is really forcing schools to think about assessment and academic integrity in a different way. So from your lens, what are you seeing districts doing well in that space, and where might they be overreacting?
I honestly don't think anyone's overreacting. I think there are a lot of really valid concerns around the implication of AI and its detrimental effects on student learning. I think it's very real that we should be very careful with this technology and thinking about how do I make sure my students are actually learning and demonstrating their learning in constructive ways. All technology, not even just AI, but all technology is designed to make our lives easier. Like most use cases of technology remove friction from something that I'm doing. And that's lovely if I'm someone who's dealing with a huge calendar and something like a calendaring app or system helps me manage that. Like it's sometimes that's good for us to make our lives easier. In the case of learning, any educator knows this, any pedagogical researcher knows this. Friction and challenging things are necessary in learning processes. Like I need to feel challenged in order to learn. And so removing friction from that equation is actually bad for learning. And so I think that a lot of the hesitation and a lot of the anxiety around leveraging AI tools for learning processes is very valid. I think the districts that are doing something well in this space, and I kind of mentioned this before, but the idea that like we can demonstrate learning in a lot of different ways, just because I'm I'm bubbling in all the right things on a Scantron sheet does not really mean I'm learning something. And so even when I was in the classroom, I remember learning a lot about inquiry-based learning, project-based learning. Like my PD sessions when I was a teacher were really about those kinds of things. And I think those are still extremely relevant. And so the districts that have, for the past 10 years, been thinking about making sure that they're implementing community-based learning opportunities, project-based learning opportunities, inquiry-based learning programs, like making sure that their teachers and their students are engaging with learning in a very real, interpersonal, relevant way.
Yeah.
Those are the school systems that I think have been really ahead of the game on this conversation around academic integrity and assessments, because they were already building mechanisms to assess student learning in a way that was more aligned with the real world. Is my student, working with a partner on this project and aligning on an objective and designing problem solving technique along the way? Like, are they doing XYZ in a way that feels relevant for the real world?
Yeah.
So I think like that, and when it comes to the assessment question, those are really, really cool and relevant ways to assess students, because that's how the real world works. We're not always assessed on multiple choice or standardized questions. We're assessed on how did we do this thing or approach this problem in a constructive way with other people, leveraging creativity or leveraging my own ability to be a person in accomplish my goal. So like the more schools do that, the more I love it. There's always a tension there because that's not how standardized testing works. That's not how that's not how state assessments work. And so there's always that tension between schools really want to push the needle on assessments, but states and larger systems are moving very slowly on understanding how to make assessments relevant. And then I would imagine, or I know that as schools think about assessments in that very proactive way, those are the schools that are dealing less with the academic integrity conversation. Because if I'm assessing whether or not I solved a problem in a real world situation, sometimes it doesn't matter if I use AI. That won't change my grade, because my grade is more based on the product-based, process-based assessments that my teachers are already doing. Where AI and academic integrity really come in tension is for assessments that are very product-based. The 5-paragraph essay, did I complete this worksheet? Did I do this thing? Did I research this stuff and have 10 sources on my works cited page? Like that kind of checkbox product-based assessments, like those are the things that AI does really well, and students can use AI and they can bypass all of the AI the security checks, and they can bypass all of the AI detectors. And so that's where there's a lot of tension between assessment and academic integrity, is when the assessment is very product-based. When the assessment is process-based, you feel a lot less tension because you can't use AI to work with your partner and talk about this thing and build a solution together. Like, AI can be useful to augment that conversation, but it will not replace that conversation.
Yeah.
And so I think that the thinking around assessments has been transforming for a decade and a half already. This isn't a new conversation that we're having around assessments. But I think that the districts that have invested are already in rethinking assessments have really been ahead of the game when it comes to making sure that we're bypassing or addressing the academic integrity questions.
I want to take that working with students in a little bit of a different path and talk about students. We want them to be AI literate because they're going to experience it after they leave our campuses. What is it that they really need to understand about, and you talked a little bit about it before, but bias and reliability and how AI shapes society? I mean, we have to go beyond just how do you prompt, and make sure that we're teaching verification and that we're talking about AI's impact on jobs and all of those things. So talk a little bit about what we should be thinking about with AI literacy.
Yeah, I think this is a moment that, from an education perspective, is very scary for two reasons. One, for a very long time, educators have always kind of had a pretty good idea about what their students' future is going to look like. When I was in school, I think my teachers were pretty confident about what kind of careers were available to me. My parents were pretty confident about what kind of career pathways they think would be best for me. There was a sense of this security that my student or my young person is going to grow up into a world that I can kind of imagine. That's becoming less true today. Parents, educators are increasingly feeling like that future is fuzzy. Like, we don't have a clear idea about what that future is going to look like. For us, a lot of parents tend to ask us, like, oh, my student's about to go to college, we're going to apply for jobs. Like, what major should I help my student choose, like my kid choose? I have no idea what majors are going to be important in the future. And the reality is, like, honestly, like, there's no right answer for this. There's a lot of economists that have hypotheses around this, but there's no right answer around what the job of the future is going to be. And so, like, that's one tension that education is experiencing right now. The other tension is that the education system as a whole is not built to pivot. It's not built to change quickly. It is not built to address the exact market needs that workforce has. And honestly, I think that's good. I don't think I want an education system that moves fast and breaks things. Like, these are kids' learnings. This is their development. I don't want to break it just because we're trying something new. And so, but we're feeling this very slow moving, slow adapting education system come into tension with a very fast moving, fast adapting market outside of the education system. Mm-hmm. Job market, the way that companies are hiring, the way that we're doing all of these really amazing things, it's changing very quickly. And so there's this tension between this really quick moving thing outside of the classroom and this very slow moving thing inside the school building. And so when I'm thinking about the those two facts, the tension around the rate of change inside and outside the classroom, and the tension around adults don't have a clear idea about what the change is going to mean for the long term. I think it's important to kind of like recognize those things and say, like, listen, teachers, parents, there's no such thing as the right answer. I think the things we need to pull out of this, and the things I think AI literacy should do beyond knowing what AI is, knowing what bias is, understanding this is like a computational thing. Mm-hmm. We also need to teach around like AI literacy from the context that, like, you should be a lifelong learner. what AI is today is going to change in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years.
Yeah.
What AI literacy means today, what bias looks like today is going to change in the future. And so the idea that I can be a lifelong learner and adapt is going to be super important. And so increasingly, I always think about AI literacy as like knowing technology is only the baseline. Knowing what AI is, knowing the technology, knowing the tools, like that kind of like tech understanding is not what AI literacy should be holistically. I think that that's a starting point. You need to understand the technology. And then on top of that, understand how do I apply my critical analysis to that? How do I make sure I'm critical of the technology? And then on top of that, like where do I have an advantage as a human? How can I leverage those human-based skills, things like lifelong learning, like critical analysis, creativity, resiliency? Like, how do I make sure that like throughout these changes, I feel confident that I or my young person is going to be resilient through the shifts in the job markets, the shift in how bias is expressed upon society. I think those are the things that I think like conversations on AI literacy don't really get into. AI literacy is important. Yes, I think we should understand the technology, but it's important to remember why AI literacy is important. It is like we don't want to understand the technology just to make sure people adopt it. This isn't an adoption push. This isn't to make sure we're getting AI into classrooms. This is like understanding the technology for the sake of lifelong learning and to build resilient young people.
Yeah, well said. So, Christian, you do all of the advocacy work for AIEDU. And can you talk a little bit about, from your advocacy seat, what is the policy conversation that's happening at the federal level right now?
This is a very wide breathing space right now. Yeah. I will say the American government traditionally is also a system that tends to move slowly. We've seen that with AI specifically, we've seen a lot of things actually move very quickly, which is pretty unlike the American government system. Or most of the motivations, or where most of the momentum is in the American government right now, is around safety, especially youth safety. Making sure that as technology changes, young people's safety is kept front of mind from a policy perspective. And so we've had a lot of legislative pushes at the federal level that are centered around that kind of safety discussion. From something like the Take It Down Act that makes sure that non-consensual sexual imagery is kept out of tech platforms, and to make sure that if there is a nudification app out there and a deep fake nude of a young person is made, that legally platforms are mandated to take those down as soon as possible. It's like that piece of legislation moved very quickly and very unanimously. Like right now, the American political system, there isn't much agreement across the aisle, but where there is a lot of agreement is child safety. How do we make sure that they were keeping that front and center? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the legislative moves that have been pushed forward recently have been centered around that. Education from a policy perspective is actually very state driven. It's not it's a lot. There's a lot of funding that comes federally, but a lot of the actual political legislative mechanisms that go into educational change happen at the state level. And at the state level, we've had I think in this legislative cycle, we have over 115 state level pieces of legislation that touch AI in education. And they vary between student safety mechanisms, from making sure that things like our state-based mandated reporter policies are updated for AI. But it also gets that's where the state legislation is also where you start to see us get into the actual what should we be teaching conversation. How should we be updating things like CTE pathway programs, like our graduation requirements at states, how we procure the kind of curricular resources that the state is using. How are we thinking about the mechanisms that exist at state departments of education to address. We've seen new positions being created around AI and the future of learning. And like a lot of states have some sort of new position at their state department of education that kind of address this conversation. And so we're building the human infrastructure to help us address this conversation. Like there's a lot of momentum there to help build that infrastructure. I think we're kind of at that moment. We're not quite at the moment where states are actually passing a ton of laws to change graduation requirements or to change workforce pathway programs. We're at the moment where we're putting some energy into it, and we haven't seen the returns against that change quite yet. The other big bucket of conversations happening right now, this is both federally and at the state level, is the tension between workforce shifting and education. Like the idea that the workforce demand is changing so much. There's a lot of job anxiety right now. 6 months ago, there are so many reports around how this is the worst workforce for recent graduates in recent history. That young people that are just graduating out of high school and college are having a very hard time finding jobs. And there's a lot of investment and momentum in the idea that we should be making sure that we're building a bridge between formal education systems and the workforce. That means that federally and locally, we're investing a lot in apprenticeship pathways, workforce pathways, internship programs. Like we're trying to build more and more bridges between formal education and jobs. And I think there's a lot of investment going there. And so those two things are not necessarily very AI specific, but I think if you talk to folks that are having this conversation, and AI is the forcing function. AI is the thing that's creating these changes that are happening so quickly and is forcing us to think about what those workforce pathways look like. It's forcing us to think about what those graduation requirements need to look like. It's forcing us to think about what student safety looks like. So it's a lot of the legislation might say AI in the title, but it might not. But a lot of times AI is a really effective and sometimes scary forcing function for this change to happen.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. I thank you for sharing that. What's next for AIEDU that you're most excited about?
I don't know what's next. I think we're doing a lot of, I will say that over the past year, this is kind of something I've loved seeing manifest. And this is not my team. This is another team at our organization that's been doing a lot of this really cool work. But we, across the board for the past 7 years, we've been working a lot in this idea of teacher capacity building, professional development, running workshops for educators. Over the past year, we've kind of rethought about what value should that be bringing? What is the right way to approach teacher training and capacity building? And a year and a half ago, we made a decision, and I guess kind of a bet, that we're not looking for numbers. Impact numbers are not as valuable to us. We can reach 2,000 teachers or 20,000 teachers or 2 million teachers. And the important thing is when we reach those educators, what is the thing that they are learning? What is the value that we're providing?
Yeah.
And so asking ourselves those questions forced us to kind of rethink the idea that we do workshops. We've moved away from the 1 hour workshop model where we're just doing this virtual workshop for a single hour, and that's your PD, and it's a check box on an educator's required PD. And we've been investing more in building out professional learning communities or teacher fellowships. What does it look like for an educator to not just do some sort of a 1 hour PD session where it's your classic stage on the stage listening session? But what does it look like when educators are joining a community of educators for 3 months? And over the span of these 3 months, I get to learn new things, but I also get to try something. I get to communicate with educators about what I've tried. I get to reflect on my learnings. I get to be a little bit more vulnerable about what I'm scared of or what I'm excited about or what I failed at. And building more community-based learning opportunities for educators has been something we've been doing a lot more of. And so like something like a shift we've made in the last like year or so. And like now I'm really excited to see a lot of like the kind of stories that have been coming out of this. What does it look like for educators that have been actually working with our community, like us from this community-based way for a year? What is it like? How are these educators growing as a professional, as an educator? What does it look like for them to hone their own opinions around AI and not have their opinions told to them, but like give them the capacity and the space to build their own opinions? Like that's been really cool for me to see. And I don't personally do a lot. I don't work on the team that does a lot of those teacher workshops. So I get to reap the benefits and hear the stories about it. It's been really amazing for me to hear.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of fun. You'll have to keep us posted.
Yeah.
So I always end with the same question, Christian, and that is, what does the term rural advantage mean to you?
I don't know. It's hard to give like a broad sweeping answer to that, because honestly, in the past, we've been doing this rural community catalyst program for about 3 years now. And for the past 3 years, one of the biggest lessons I've learned is there's no such thing as like a one size fits all definition or situation for rural school systems. I will say a common thread that I've seen, and this is probably one of the key rural advantages, are just heart, like the sense of shared community, shared values. There's a lot of passionate people working in rural systems right now, in rural education systems specifically. You always hear the usual stories of like, the superintendent also tends to be the bus driver, or also does noon duty and watches students at recess. Like that doesn't come from that isn't just because they need another bus driver. Sometimes it's because that superintendent cares so much about their community that they're happy sometimes to drive the bus or to pick up trash at lunch. Like there's so much heart in this. I will also say one thing that I've found that sometimes isn't always thought of as a rural advantage is rural systems are built for innovation far more readily than a lot of big urban or suburban school systems are. This is like in West Texas, we were working with the district, and we were talking about the kind of AI policies that they were putting forth. And the superintendent was like, hold on. And he like pulls out his phone and he jumps on this group chat with his school board. And he just like texts the school board like, hey, we need to kind of set these XYZ policies in place. Here's a draft. We'll talk about it next week. And the school board, like in about a week, the school board reviewed, drafted policies and approved policies. And it was like all done because there were such interpersonal relationships built behind the work that they're doing, that trust was already there. The conversations, like the conversations felt a lot easier and they felt more interpersonal. It wasn't a battle that the superintendent was having with the school board. It was a collaboration he was having with the school board. Like that leads to such cool innovation, that leads to such, like, the superintendent has the ability to be creative. They have the ability to get to conversations that allow them to move things quickly where things need to be moved quickly. I thought that was amazing. And that I feel like a lot of rural school systems have that advantage.
Yeah. Well said. I appreciate that perspective because you're spot on.
Yeah. The words innovation and rural don't always go together, but I think they belong together.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I like to talk about is we innovate out of necessity. Your students need something, you're going to make it happen with what you got. So yeah, you have to innovate.
Yeah. Innovate out of necessity and with heart. Like it's so
That's even
valuable.
better. That's even better. Well, Christian, thank you for bringing some clarity and practicality to a topic that really easily turns into a lot of hype or fear. And I appreciate the way that you really focus on, the practical things, making sure that you have guardrails in place to protect your students and supporting educators and keeping communities grounded in a worthwhile conversation around AI. So thanks for spending some time.
Yeah, I appreciate you so much. And I appreciate this platform and this ability to spotlight a lot of amazing work happening across rural communities. And it's really cool to see your storytelling as you've been doing more and more of this.
Appreciate it. You're welcome back anytime.
Love to.
Well, friends, if this conversation helped you, please hit that subscribe button and subscribe to The Rural Scoop because it helps other rural educators find the show. And it helps us keep elevating leaders who are doing the work in real time. And as always, like the episode, leave a comment with your takeaway and share it with a rural colleague who's also trying to make sense of AI in their district. I'm your host, Melissa Sadorf, and remember, in rural leadership, our strength is our shared story. When we lead together, we thrive together. I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Rural Scoop. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep these important rural conversations going. And we'd love to hear from you, so feel free to leave a comment or share your thoughts. You can follow along and never miss a new release by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or by following us on social. We're on YouTube at The Rural Scoop, Instagram at msadorf1, and X at msadorf03. The Rural Scoop is produced with support from Vela Educational Consultants. To learn more, visit velaconsultants.com. See you next time for more great discussions about rural education. And as always, keep leaning in to the rural advantage.